As we've all learned, all these great innovations do not amount to anything unless they attract investment funds. This can be a tricky business where exotic technologies are concerned, especially where the proof of concept stage itself needs funding. Look to cold fusion as one example of that. One of the estimates is $10 million. As I said yesterday, part of a BP oil spill fine could have funded some of the initial rounds to really get cold fusion, one version of it, up and running. Dr. David Martin has made the financial side of innovation his life's work. His company, MCAM, is the global steward of the world's only global innovation commons, which provides open source innovation in the domains of water, non-carbon energy, agriculture, and health technologies. His work on ethical engagement and stewardship of community is at the forefront of global financial innovation. He's closely advised innovation-based finance and investment programs all over the world. I'll read you a few. India, China, Denmark, United Kingdom, South Africa, Islamic Republic of Iran, United States, and more. Today, he shares his wisdom on how to proceed on the funding of profound technologies, such as what we're seeing at this conference. Please welcome Dr. David Martin.
Thank you. So there's a great myth that was born last year in Hilversum. And so I wanted to begin by actually showing that those of you who thought that my presentation last year was kind of staged and contrived, and you figured that it was probably something. What was the thing? Where was he getting his magical powers to be so animated? A lot of people actually got onto something, and they were onto something correct, and it really was the bow tie. Yep. So, if you're going to do this talk, it's me unplugged. You know, we haven't had enough striptease in this place. So it's not just me unplugged, but it's me unveiled. And there's more. No, I'm kidding. This presentation is meant in deepest respect to everyone who's here, and in deepest respect to everyone who is in the ecosystem that we call our home. I want to be very clear before I start this presentation. We as a civilization of humanity, we as a community of humans on this planet, will not, let me be very clear, we will not break through. We will not advance. We will not transform until we realize that energy is. It is. It's not free. Energy is not contained. Energy is not the basis of power and conspiracy and control. Energy is. And until we have that realization, we're going to be missing out on a lot of things. So today, my intention is to shock you, to appall you, and most of all, to invite you to consider something that is that edge that conferences like these are not even interested in considering. By the end of this presentation, it is my hope that one of you joins a new journey and a new conversation. But most importantly, to reprise my opening line from Hilversum, please, 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 don't dishonor the cosmos by pretending that it's free. The cosmos isn't free. The cosmos comes at this beautiful expense of its constant, generative, imaginative, creative impulse. And that takes everything, not nothing. It takes it all. It takes all of us. It takes the entirety of the universe. And I will no more dishonor the cosmos and the source of all life, power, and energy by diminishing it to say it's of no value. than I would to offend the beauty that's in my life and in my world. Our lives, our existences are precious. Our lives, our existences are valuable. And they are so valuable that they truly are priceless because they cost all. Remember that and honor that. So, shock therapy. If we have a clicker that's working. Am I supposed to turn something on here? Green isn't. There we go. Currency. Uh-oh, not that far. Currency. Where did the word come from? Until 1691, the word current had to do with the flow of streams. It had to do with the movement of the wind. It had to do with the movement of heat. It had to move with all that is moving in the universe. And in 1691, a statement was made that has permeated every single economic textbook since it was made in 1691. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Old English spelling, this is John Locke's statement that has become dogma in our society, and that statement is a perversion of the book of Proverbs and wisdom from the book of Ecclesiastes, where John Locke wrote in 1691, money answers everything. Money answers everything. His words, 1691. Not a single economic system since 1691 anywhere on this planet has actually challenged that falsehood. And by the way, in a conference like this, I'm not supposed to challenge that falsehood. Every one of the presentations I listened to yesterday, in every single one of the presentations, the word funding came up. And I am here to absolutely and unequivocally call out in a prophetic sense that we will not transform until we take on this lie. Because this is the lie that has kept humanity from advancing. And this is the utility that keeps us enslaved. And I'm tired of being the man on the slave ship, walking around on the slave ship without manacles on, telling every other slave on the slave ship, drop the manacles, only to be told we're more comfortable this way. Guess what? Transformation does not come in the midst of enslavement. Transformation comes when we, the people, rise and say to ourselves, we will not be chained. We will not be chained. And my passion is from a place that I will tell you has more power than every toroid that you can imagine. Because this power comes from source. And source is abundant. It's generative. It is boundless. And it will not manifest itself until we are worthy of its manifestation. The original sin. I have a bunch of patents. Does that make me an inventor? No. We have this bullshit illusion that came about 6,000 years ago. The bullshit illusion is called creator. That's a bullshit illusion. Creator. We want so bad to be able to name the thing that started the thing. We want so bad to build dogma about the thing that started the thing. And we're so unwilling to accept that it has been, it is, and it will be. Dimensionless. Timeless. And are you ready for this? Identityless. Identityless. seriously. If the truth is told, is there an inventor among us? No. We had a dream one day. We figured out a puzzle one day. But did the puzzle come out of ex nihilo? No. It came from our thoughts. It came from our words. It came from our social metaphors. It came from every part of the grist of what made us human. And at one point, we had this flash of genius that allowed us to see something in a way others didn't see it before. Does that make it ours? No. It doesn't make it ours. It means that we have become entrusted as stewards of a thing that the universe has decided to unveil to us. We are not inventors. We are not creators. We are stewards of perspective. And if we can't see ourselves in that light, then we will go down the original sin cascade to ask investors, who, by the way, did not make the money, did not have the money, did nothing to actually formulate money. Those investors who are the arbiters of what lives and what dies are not the arbiters of what lives and what dies. Source is the arbiter of what lives and dies, not investors. Ever. Not once, not twice, never. And I'm so tired of seeing the suppression that is not suppression. It is your illusion that is reflecting back on yourself. It's not suppression. It's your illusion reflecting back on yourself because you have allowed your entrusted nature to be arbitrated by a person who has a currency that you and Source do not recognize. This just in. The final step in the original sin is the industrialist. The ultimate in slavery. Adam Smith and Karl Marx cited each other in their work, literally and metaphorically in one case. Why? They actually reduced the human experience to the application of labor to nature. And I'm quoting from both of them. So just so you get my left and my right, I can wear a bow tie, and I can also march in a parade, right? I can do both. Both of them got it wrong. They said value is only recognized when humans attribute labor to a system. Do we agree with that? Do we agree with any of that? Has there anywhere in your life been something that was valuable to which humans had not put their single fingerprint? I'm going to tell you what. When I'm in bed with my wife, and I love to be in bed with my wife, and she's here, I can guarantee you that the magic of what I experience with her in my life is something I have not architected. I have not architected that. And you know what? She hasn't architected that. What I can tell you is that the charge that actually exists within us is a charge that comes from Source, not from something that I put effort and labor into. And you know what? I value that. I value that above all else. Because in that moment of purity and transcendence and bliss, I'm going to tell you what. I'm transported in things that no flying hovercraft can ever get me to. No fusion reactor will ever get me closer to Source than in that moment when I know that I am in fact unified in the ancient stream of Source. That, ladies and gentlemen, is breakthrough energy. That's breakthrough energy. In conferences like this, we are actually chasing ghosts. And let's call it out the way it is. I'm sick and tired of Tesla nostalgia. Okay? There you go. I said it. And I said it in this room. Why? Who has among us spent time looking at what happened in 1868 and then again in 1888? when Tesla, the brilliant conduit of wisdom and insight from the universe, why on earth do you suppose the man on your left exists? Why do you suppose he exists? He defiled Tesla. Did you hear what I just said? He defiled Tesla. The reason why there is a Westinghouse is because $5 million distracted one of the greatest minds the world's seen. Did you hear what I said? Did you hear what I said? $5 million. Just a few pieces of silver. Took one of the greatest minds the world has seen and defiled it. Don't tell me about a conspiracy, because it's not a conspiracy. It's a choice that you and I get to make every day, because with the coin comes the conscience. Listen to that. With the coin comes the conscience. It's not by accident that Westinghouse, to this day, propagates more damaging electrical technologies around this world than any other place. Why? Because they actually tasted the divine and corrupted it. And the agency of that corruption was the coin. Don't tell me about conspiracies. That was a conscience and sentience and decision-filled moment in time when the coin was the seduction that actually led a great mind into being hijacked. The only time that's happened? No. I give you the cast of characters who have each manifest in their own way the same stroke of brilliance, the same aggregation of genius, and to a person, each one of them was bought for 30 pieces of silver. Conspiracy? No. Conferences like these, which have happened since Thales, by the way, seriously, since then. In fact, there was a breakthrough energy conference that took place in 68 BC. You know what they were talking about? They were talking about fusion. No kidding. You can go back and read this. You know what else they were talking about? They were talking about wireless power distribution. You know what else they were talking about? They were talking about zero-point energy from water in 69 BC. Breakthrough bullshit. Why did we lose our way in 69 BC? We lost our way because we were seduced. And I'm going to tell you today, we are as susceptible to that seduction today as we were then. The worst part about it is we don't believe in prophets anymore. Back then, they still believed in prophets. They still believed that human beings could actually access wisdom and insight and perspective from somewhere much greater and much further and much more beyond than just Wikipedia and just Google. Why will we continue to fall for it? Well, ladies and gentlemen, I present you the history of the world. And by the way, I love to actually kind of diffuse a little bit of the mystique around the great evils of the capital market system, because I want you to look at this graph, and I want you to look at three very interesting pieces of data on this graph. This is from 1962 forward, just to give us a little context. I could have run this back to the early 1900s, but I didn't, because it's a really long graph and it starts making me look like Al Gore with a stupid climate change chart, so I'm not going to do that. But what I will do is I'll actually encourage you to look at the fact that the two upper lines, United Technologies and the General Electric Corporation, have actually outperformed by 3,000% listen to what I just said, by 3,000%, that's over unity for those of you doing the math, 3,000%, the sum total of JP Morgan, which you see here in brown, right? The great evil 1%? Nonsense. You were sitting in the wrong park with the wrong damn drum circle. It had nothing to do with JP Morgan, ladies and gentlemen. Look where the money is. The money is not in the banks. The money is in the utilities. UTX and GE crush every single other equity in the market, and the reason why is because it's how the heroin keeps flowing in the system. And we all love it, and we all pretend like we're above it, and we all want to coerce it, and we all want to reposition it. But at the end of the day, guess what? That's where the wild things are. It's not in the banks. The banks are merely intermediaries to the enslavement. They're the slave traders. They're the slave traders. They're not the ones with the whip in their hands. They're not the ones that are defiling the sanctity of humanity. They're facilitating it. They're pimps. That's where the wild things are. This is the question that we never ask ourselves. What the hell is it about this thing? And why does that look almost like a face? Why does it almost look like a face? Because it was the last laugh to actually see if we'd wake up. And we didn't. This is the sinister view of a capital system that actually wants you and me to be dependent on it. The one thing that's missing from this? What's the one thing that's missing from this? It's a disembodied head. What's missing from it is a body. That's what's missing. I'm going to show you a little bit of a journey, which is our problem. Now, to be clear, I'm now going into the offense mode. This is me getting ready to go into the offense mode. So I'm about to actually step on every sacred cow, gore every sacred ox. I'm about to do everything that will actually get me cast into the darkness with wailing and gnashing of teeth. But it's an important darkness to get cast into, because through it is a wormhole. And out the other side of the wormhole, a star is born. So cast me into the darkness, cast away, because I love that journey. It's awesome. And you don't need a flying machine to get you there. When we actually take on the incumbent capital system, who are we taking on? Well, it's easy. We know we're taking on wealthy investors, of course. That's who we always take on. But we're taking on wealthy investors. We know that. Now it's going to get a little more dodgy here. We're taking on pensions and retirements, because remember, the idea that we don't have to work forever is an idea born of drudgery. Do you know how much I'm aspiring to retirement? 0. You know why? Because I live. I do not work. I live. And it turns out I live productively. And it turns out I love living productively. And the idea that you could somehow put up an illusion that says, and don't you wish one day never to have to do what you're doing again, is as ridiculous as saying, don't you wish you'd never breathe again? I love what I do. I'm passionate about what I do. And if you take my 401k and my pension, carry them all the way to hell with you, because I don't want them. I want to be productive until the moment the lights go out. Sorry about that. I just offended a lot of people, but that's life. Fiduciaries, insurers, the motherlode of motherlodes. The conversation that we never have in meetings like this, which is, where's the real money? Well, the real money, by the way, is not in the banks. It's in Bermuda. It's in the Cayman Islands. It's with insurers. Why? They have long-dated assets. And what do those long-dated assets need? They need bonds. You guys like the name bonds, by the way? Bonds. Yeah, it sounds so cool, doesn't it? Bonds. wonder if it has anything to do with the bondage that we feel around ourselves. Yes, it does. There's a reason why it was called a bond. Because it bound you. That's why. And it's no surprise, by the way, that municipalities and governments use bonds as a way to sate the appetite of risk-taking entities that are betting against what? The failure of humanity. The failure of the environment. They're betting on the failure of things. That's the system that we live in. That's the system that we built, and that's the system that we fall on our knees to appeal to for succor for the things that we want to do to actually break through. Do you hear the madness in that? Yeah. Do you hear the insanity in that? That is the definition of insane. Yet we march on, including inventors who are looking for funding. Now, this is a PG show, so I have to make sure that I clarified that what I have is really fund in that sentence. Do you guys get something? Do you guys get the fact that until we as a community wake up to the fact that we have put the newborn infant of our creativity, our animating impulse, our stewardship, we've put it on an altar of Moloch. And the altar of Moloch actually gets to decide whether the pure, undefiled infant is going to live or die. And we ask that priest and that priestess to decide whether to give us succor to let that infant grow. And we do that unconsidered of any alternative. We say, but for funding. Ladies and gentlemen, the reason why breakthrough energy will not and cannot happen is that sentence is actually wisdom in the universe listening to our prayers and saying, until you get it, you're not going to get it. Until you get it, you're not going to get it. You can perpetuate slavery as long as you want. And guess what? The human race has done a fabulous job of doing that. But until we're willing to take on the one fulcrum that the incumbency is used to enslave humanity, then humanity is not worthy of the benefits of abundance. We cannot be worthy of the benefits of abundance if we continue to use the agency of enslavement. A smart guy, a long time ago, wearing a toga, in his early 30s, actually made a quote that I want to actually kind of come back to for a second. This is a guy in his 30s who made a quote when he was getting that gotcha moment, when the Pharisees were coming to him and saying, hey, you're a wise guy. What do we do with this thing called money? And if you recall the story in the Bible, he actually takes a coin. He says, do you have a coin? And he takes a coin, and he actually takes a temple coin, and he says what? He says, render to Caesar that which is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. Guess whose imprimatur we are allowing to defile the notion of breakthrough energy? We are actually asking Caesar for permission to unravel his empire. Newsflash, there's a reason why Caesars thought themselves Caesar. And that hasn't changed in 2,000 years. So you can try to wallpaper it and shellac it and tell everybody the story you want to tell them, but guess what? That truth doesn't change. And the other truth that doesn't change is the mistaken quote that if he was really smart, Einstein would have said, instead of that nonsense quote about problems and solutions and the level of consciousness and thinking, which is a nonsense quote compared to this brilliant quote that was derived from a guy that had less hair. And that brilliant quote from a guy with less hair had less interference, because Einstein had all kinds of static noise coming in with consciousness, and thank God I don't, because that sentence is actually more true. No breakthrough can be provisioned reliant on the same sovereign currency that maintains incumbent power and the status quo. That, ladies and gentlemen, is more brilliant than any quote Einstein made about consciousness. Because it turns out that consciousness is actually not the problem. We are all conscious. The problem is when we sell out our conscience and defile our conscious. And I meant it exactly the way I said it. When we defile the conscious, that which is embedded within us, we defile our conscience. And we can have none. Because being almost pure is what? Almost. But Dave, a little, right? Just a little? Can't I just have a little bit of it? No. We lost as a civilization a long time ago the privilege of the prophet who's willing to stand up in front of a group of people and speak the truth. I know this is unpopular, but I'm going to tell you something. This is not dogma. This is how I live. This is how I live. I live in a world where I don't accept the lies. And by the way, just a few lies. Free. Seriously? No, it isn't. No, it isn't. The fact that we are not the agencies and arbiters of what control is doesn't mean that it's free. The fact that we don't understand where it comes from doesn't mean it's free. And if we're smart, we'll start paying homage to the fact that we are the recipients and the beneficiaries of an abundance that we actually don't even fully understand. We get the edges and the windows and the bits and pieces around it, but we don't actually understand what it is. And let's not defile it with free, any more than we should defile 98% of our DNA, which really smart scientists tell us is junk. Seriously? Junk? No, it isn't. No, it isn't. Every single one of those mitotic moments that's just before the cellular divide is magnetism, and that magnetism is formed through chromosomal electrical charges that actually build out polarity that allow for the separation of the absolute replication of life. And in a moment, in that pre-mitotic moment, exactly which part of the DNA is junk? We actually, courtesy of the ultimate fraud of science at the hands of Watson and Crick, decided to walk into this beautiful tapestry of life, take all the threads out of the tapestry, drop them on the floor in single strands, and then go, we can't quite get the picture. Well, duh. It was a picture when it was a tapestry. If you stretch it out into single strands, it's just thread. Of course you can't get the meaning of life. You can't get the meaning of life because you defiled it before it was born. And then you wonder why you can't figure it out. Well, giant mystery. Over-unity. Over-unity doesn't exist because over-unity is merely that which we have not yet been able to apprehend and measure. It's still all there. We have cute gizmos, we have cute gadgets, we have things that actually do things, but at the end of the day, it's not over-unity. It's actually the approximation of all unity. It is, in fact, unity. And unity is abundant and limitless and flowing and capable of generative service to all. And guess what? It doesn't like to be called over unity. Just like Dali didn't like to be called a freak artist. You bend pocket watches over tree limbs. Oh, that's a very fascinating concept. Stay the hell away from me. See, we live in a world where we've gotten so intoxicated on the Creator, but we so hate the creation that we want to label everything, and we want to put labels on everything. Profit isn't profit. It's disregard for the all-in cost. Why is GE and UTX so phenomenally successful? They're so phenomenally successful because they're not actually paying for the benefits that they're extracting. And it turns out if you don't pay for the benefits you extract, it looks like you're really profitable. But profit is an illusion. Profit is a function of a measure of inefficiency. And the greater the profit, the greater the inefficiency. Did you hear what I just said? The greater the profit, the greater the inefficiency. That's not anti-capitalist, by the way. This is not rhetorical. That's actually an absolute truth. There is no profit. We're not better off. That nonsense video from Shell about more people living in better quality of life, nonsense. The last 50 years have seen the explosion of people living without clean water, access to food, access to any form of healthful, suitable engagement because their land is defiled and their water is defiled and their forests are cut down and their biomes are absolutely decimated. And we're better because we might have a refrigerator in 3 more houses? Really? Really? A refrigerator? I actually have seen open pit mines. I've actually been recently in Bougainville where you get to see people doing alluvial mining in the tailings. And the cool thing about doing alluvial minings and tailings is from the knees down, you actually have open sores that don't close, ever. Because the leachate in the water is actually killing people's legs. And they're standing in that water, actually mining for a modicum of gold so that they can do what? Have a better quality of life? Seriously? Would any of the people in Bougainville trade their forest, which used to be the mountain, which is now Panguna Mine? Would any of them trade that mountaintop for the sores on their legs? No. Free isn't free. Over unity isn't. Profits are a modicum of inefficiency that we have become immune to perceiving. These are terms of a property-built world where we have instilled rules and boundaries on things that defy rules and boundaries. And if we didn't have the rules and boundaries as our MO, we wouldn't have any of these words. How do we change it? How do we change it? Well, we change it by recognizing that we're stewards. And that in stewardship, we actually have to approach a world that says it's all here. And by all, I mean all. I mean all the power that we need. I mean all the food that we need. I mean all of the networks and communities and associations and everything that we need is here. We live in this giant illusion created by a series of impulses that we've been trained since 1691 to actually recite, which is money solves it all. 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 You know, when you say that often enough, it starts sounding really gross. It makes you kind of nauseous. And it makes you nauseous for a very good reason. Because money isn't. It's an illusion. These are not illusions. The 5 basic elements of the earth that have been known about since the beginning of recorded modern history, we actually know those elements are actually here. And they're not here for our use. Did you hear what I said? They're not here for our use. They're here, like we're here. If we're going to use them, magnets, toroidal fields, wind, water, if we're going to use them, we have to use them and honor them in their use, or we will defile them in their abuse. We have to understand that custom and culture, the piece that knits us together, is a piece that knits us together so that we as a people can rise and actually engage in a moral and ethical and generative conversation about how we as humanity can stand together. Not set up a series of rules and boundaries and say, sorry, that's mine, that's mine, that's mine, and oh, by the way, if you don't agree with my rules, I'm going to actually shoot you, or I'm going to kill you, or I'm going to poison you, I'm going to do all the things that I want to do because that's mine. There is no such thing as mine. There isn't. I did a little accounting of the GlobalBEM conference so far, and the little accounting using 6 dimensions of value, not the monetary view of value, actually says we have a fairly high degree of knowledge in this audience. But there's a lot of pain. There's a lot of absence of well-being. There's a lot of harm, and there's a lot of hurt. There's a lot of agony, and there's a lot of isolation. And that's amazing, because if we look at it as a polarity, we actually realize that while we have an abundance of knowledge, we have an anemia of well-being. We have an abundance of commodities. There are a bunch of things that we have. We have ways to reduce our thoughts into models, and we have ways to have conversation. We have language. We have an abundance of commodity. But you know what? We have a lack of money. Did you hear what I just said? This guy that was just railing against money just said we had a lack of money, because we do. I didn't say we had a lack of euros and dollars and pounds. I said we had a lack of money. Big difference. Big difference. Remember, same level of creativity. Einstein's quote, Dave Martin's quote, same level of animating value exchange, same level of the utility of value. We don't have money that actually works for us. We do not have it because it's not here. We have an abundance of technology. But how many of us have an abundance of custom and culture? How many of us, when we leave this conference, go back to isolation? How many of us go back to our individuated efforts? How many of us actually go back and work alone, hard, with a lot of effort and a lot of toil? How many of us do that? See, we've got a lot of some things. We've got a lot of lack of some things. And that imbalance is something that cannot fly. It cannot soar. It cannot transcend. And it cannot break through. We can't have it all until we honor it all. Now, the world that was and the world that is have very different phenotypic expressions. And I got a punchline in here which is really worth it, so hang with me on this one. The past world is a world of enclosure. That enclosure is a world of enclosure where others make the rules. They arbitrate what is and what isn't acceptable. The world of patents, which Jefferson famously wrote in the end of the 18th century, was the ultimate offense of the free markets. Did you hear what I said? Jefferson, the first patent examiner, the author of the current patent law, referred to his own creation as an offense to the free markets. Yet we sit here in conferences talking about our patented technology. Nonsense. Let's start trusting humanity. Let's start putting humanity in front of a system that Jefferson had the wisdom to see as an affront to the capital markets and say it's about entering into agreements and covenants with each other. And how about we actually agree that we're trustworthy? Because to him who's been trusted with a little, more will be trusted. But to him who's been trusted with much, even more will be entrusted. It's time that we break the manacles. And that's a manacle. And we have to break it. And we have to start understanding that the value of our systems are not in their enclosure, but in their proliferation. You were not given an idea from source for your interest, because source neither recognizes you in an individuated, isolated sense, nor your interest in an individuated, isolated sense. Source recognizes you as an agent within a system. And as an agent within a system, we must stand for principle. And principle is not enclosure, it's agreement. We don't have funding, we have provisioning. How many people in this room could actually benefit from shared laboratory space? How many people in this room could benefit from shared computational space? If you missed Joel's speech yesterday, you missed a great speech because he talked about the fact that we need standards. You know, the best form of standard is accountability. When you have a colleague and a colleague actually examining each other's lives. That level of accountability, which happens in proximity, that level of accountability that happens when we actually agree that we value each other, is transcendently more valuable than trying to fight our way into our dark closets and hope we're then discovered. We, as a society, need to stop talking about invention and we have to start talking about creative manifestation. It's a totally different concept. Invention turns you into a little demigod, and you run around going, I invented, I invented, I invented. Nonsense, you did not. You were entrusted, and the moment you decided to enclose it, you defiled the source that gave it to you. You defiled the source that gave it to you. None of us, not a single one of us, can actually stand confidently before all humanity and say, it was all about me. It never was all about you, just like it never was all about me. Proof? Give me a break. Prove what? Prove that you can get your over Unity device to go into a wall socket. Why would you be dumb enough to do that? If the thing's throwing off heat, find the heat thing to do with it. If it's throwing off cold, find the cold thing to do with it. If it's starting to spin, find a spinning thing to do with it. Don't let the incumbent system tell you how to manifest what source is trying to get to humanity. It doesn't have to be reduced to a grid. In fact, I would go as far as to say, if it's reduced to a grid, it ain't worth the price of admission. Because grids are dependency, and grids are enslavement, and grids are manacles, and there's a reason why they're called grids. Because they're meant to cow and enslave. Governance and honor, secrecy and accountability. How do we get here? We get here a simple way. We stop asking for funding. We stop being dependent on money. We start actually doing something which is an old human innovation, not an invention, a human innovation that actually built one of the greatest empires that actually figured out how to make cold fusion work, how to make gravity a friend, not a law. A civilization that actually went for a few thousand years. They didn't have debt-based currency. You know what they had? They had promissories. You know the difference between a currency or a money and a promissory? The word promise. You know what's built into the word promise? It's a commitment between people. This is the money we need. The money we need is a social contract that withers if it's not used. There's no new empire to be built on earth promissories. No, in fact, you're actually poorer the more you hoard them. You actually gain wealth by their flow and by their exchange. New earth promissories. A world in which the covenant is not reducible to metal or power or utility, but actually reducible to the quality of the humanity that is exchanging them. And by the way, they only last 7 years. Which means every 7th year we have a jubilee. When we get to actually reset the clock. We get to reset the system. And we get to re-engage our humanity and say, is this working for us? Not a series of 30-year treasuries that we default on, like we're about to do here in the United States. Again. Like we did in 2001. Like we did in 1971. Like we did in 1941. The 30-year treasury is the thing that you're asking for every time you ask for funding. Next time I hear somebody say funding, I hope all of you actually sit there and say, please provision me. Provision me. Don't fund me. Provision me. Provision me with humanity. Provision me with the ability to be in a network of people that trust each other, that actually remember the promises that are made between each other. Provision me with an ecosystem that actually screams forth the generative nature of an abundant universe, not a system built on tyranny and suppression and blood. I'm going to give you a gift, which is a gift that Margaret Mead tried to corrupt. Some of you are familiar with Margaret Mead. the very famous anthropologist, sociologist, and psychopath. Margaret Mead went to the Pacific. And she went to the Pacific Ocean, and she actually was invited to some custom ceremonies in Papua New Guinea. And the one custom ceremony she was invited to, which actually led to the Australian government's determination that the communities of Papua New Guinea, who had lived in the Pacific for 40,000 years peacefully, 40,000 years peacefully. She observed a ceremony in which she saw people at a wedding exchanging long strands of shells. And it turned out there was a huge amount of shells in the groom's family, which were actually given to the bride's family. And after those shells were exchanged, the bride was actually taken over to the groom's family. And in that moment, Margaret Mead coined the term shell money, and she coined the term bride price. Shell money, bride price. Now, Margaret Mead, I told you, was a sociopath. And I'll tell you why. If you actually go and live with the communities in Papua New Guinea, you find out that there's a very interesting thing which happens with tambu, which is what those string of shells is called. When tambu is exchanged, it's a record of future generosity. You hear what I just said? It's a record of future generosity. Because what happens is that when I give tambu to someone, I'm creating a public expectation of their future generosity. Because at the next cultural event, another wedding, a funeral, another gathering, a sacred moment, the person who is entrusted with a lot of tambu in the previous ceremony is expected to show up with what they got and more. And more. And the public is held in account. And the object of derision is the person who received much and gave little. That culture has lasted for 40,000 years. And it's a culture that honors the generous nature of shells in the sea and the generous productivity of a community that brings those shells into strands. That culture has lasted for 40,000 years, and guess what? Not a single refrigerator on any island. Not a single cell phone anywhere. And those people can sit next to a rock on the top of a mountain and hear the ocean so that they can hear when it's time to leave the mountaintop and go to the ocean to fish. And just 2 days ago, the US, the French, and the UK and Australian governments decided to authorize the fouling of that sea to mine copper off the seabed 2 miles below the surface of the water. Today, while we're sitting here, the elders on Kunsat Mountain are listening to the earth being violated with technology that none of us can approximate. Ladies and gentlemen, it is with great humility that I say, take off the manacles. We, as a species, need to be free. But free does not come from abusing systems that we don't count. Free comes when we are unencumbered from that which has held us back. And we don't step into freedom. We breathe the sweet breath of liberty. Thank you very much.